Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all having a good Wednesday afternoon today. Weather's nice here. And another thing is, today is video number 100. And I've racked my brain for a couple of weeks trying to think, what do I want to do for video 100? And I decided, well, I've got all these NASCAR cards. I'll go through as many of them as quickly as I can, which I did. I think I made it through all of them at least once, excuse me, in this last week in preparation for this video. So that's looking at about 200,000 cards that I've just skimmed through really quickly. And what I wanted to do was do a video featuring cards of strictly the cars over the years and what I would consider 100 of my personal either favorite paint schemes or a paint scheme that had some significance either related to the driver, the race, so on and so forth. And it was really difficult to narrow it down, as you can imagine, just literally going through cars and cars and cars and cars and cars, and then whittling it down, and I just now got it down to the 100 cards that I wanted, and I have a stack of about another 50 that didn't make it that would have equally went through any of these. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start this, and we're going to do it in numerical order of the way that I've got the cars placed in this, and we'll zip through this rather quickly because there's going to be at least... Well, there's going to be 100 cards exactly here, but what we're going to do is I'll just maybe make a brief statement about each one as we go through them, but I'm not going to worry about the year of the card. We'll just talk about the cars real quick. This one's Bobby Dotter, as you can see there. This was the original car that was sponsored by DeWalt in the then Busch series. Of course, DeWalt went on to sponsor Matt Kenseth and now Eric Jones. Number one car of... This one was Steve Park. This was the original full-time entry for Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. I always like this paint job from Randy LaJoie and James Phoenix Racing in the Busch series back in the late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of people don't see this one very much. This is from 1985, Petty Enterprises. Richard Brooks and Morgan Shepherd ran about 5 races early on before Petty Enterprises did shut down in 1985 briefly. But I always just thought it was unique to have a Petty Ford, no sponsor, and they had to shut down because of that. We have a... This is the Cup Series, so that'd be a DEI car of Martin Truex Jr. Always loved the when they went to the Earnhardt memorial stripes on the side of the car. And of course, the numbers were always italicized with DEI. We have a Busch Series car, Ricky Craven. Ricky ran for his own team during this time, number 2 DuPont Automotive Finishes Chevy. Always liked that paint scheme. Of course, Jeff Gordon ran a DuPont paint scheme in the Cup Series, more of a rainbow. That one, I don't know what you call that design. This is the car that Dale Earnhardt won his first Cup Series title in back in 1980. I believe there's a second one right behind it here. But the significance of this one, you see the Wrangler jean sponsorship on there. So he had a Wrangler jean sponsorship going all the way back into the 1980 season. 1981, he went to this car. This would have been mid-season when he switched from the Osterlund team to J.D. Stacy's team. And that was because Brad Osterlund wanted to get out. J.D. Stacy bought the car, the equipment, and everything. But later, Earnhardt would take the Wrangler sponsorship from that team. We have Rusty Wallace. This was Rusty's second year in the circuit, 1985. This car was owned by Cliff Stewart, who also owned Spectrum Furniture. But as you can see, Rusty had Aluguard ties for quite a while. This was the Pontiac that Roger Penske owned that Rusty would drive. This picture's from 1993. You can see the 28 and the 7 there on the C-post. But this was the team that Rusty would drive for from 1991 to 2005. When Wrangler left at the end of 87, they sponsored Dale Earnhardt's car in 1988. This was the only one I could find that had a really good picture of his GM Goodrich Monte Carlo. Really like that. It was a really sharp car. They started out with silver numbers, and eventually they went to white. When they switched to the Lumina-bodied cars, as you can see here, that white really pops a lot better. This would have been taken at the tire test in 1993 at Indianapolis. Now, the J.D. Stacy car in 1981 was number 2. Earnhardt left mid-season, went to Richard Childress' team, took his sponsorship to Childress' team, which was numbered 3. A very similar car. And of course, in 2010, Dale Earnhardt Jr. ran a nationwide race with the same paint scheme as that 1981 Monte Carlo, or that Pontiac. So I'll just do kind of a side-by-side here and let you guys look at the original car on the top and then the one that was ran in 2010. Very, very similar in paint schemes. Both are very attractive cars. Excuse me, my allergies have been horrible today, so we'll get through this as best we can. I have another 3 car. This one was run in 1996 that you can see there in Suzuka, Japan on the road course. This was NASCAR's first trip to Japan. They ran the Suzuka 97 and at Twin Ring Motegi in 1998. This car was also an identical paint scheme ran in the Busch Series from 97 and 98 with Steve Park. 1999, or I'm sorry, 96 and 95 and 96 with Park. Okay, scratch that. 96 and 97 with Steve Park, 98 and 99 with Dale Jr., and 2000 with Ron Hornaday. Then the AC Delco sponsorship went over to the Richard Childress-owned number 2 Chevys. Remember, the number 3 in the Busch Series at that time was owned by Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. We have the very iconic Kodak film number 4 car that ran from 1986 till early 2000s when the Kodak sponsorship just kind of dissolved away slowly from this team and became an associate on the Penske teams for a few years. But this car ran for a number of years with this very basic paint scheme. It was very noticeable and usually very fast at the tracks, especially the plate tracks, with Sterling Marlin, Bobby Hamilton, and others driving that car over the years, and Ernie Irvan. Ernie got them their first win. 1984, Kyle Petty switched from Pontiacs to Fords at Petty Enterprises. Of course, Richard Petty left the team to go to Mike Curb for a couple of years. This would eventually become the number 1 car that we showed you at the beginning of the video. But in 1985, Kyle went to the Wood Brothers, took the 7-Eleven sponsorship and the number 7 with him. But this was just a very unique paint job. The 1985 cars painted up very similar, and the way you tell them apart is the headlight buckets on the 84 car are going to be red. The 85 car were blue. And on the 84 car, you will have STP prominently shown, as well as Motorcraft quality parts. I don't believe those showed up on the 85 car. Excuse me. We have 1992 champion Alan Kulwicki here. Of course, he drove his Hooters, self-owned Hooters-sponsored Fords to the championship in 1992, and Alan was killed early in the 93 season in a private airplane crash. This was Alan's car from 1988, as we're losing a couple of cards here off the stack. 1988. This was his self-owned Xerox Fords. He had several top 10 finishes and got his first career win at Phoenix in 1988 in this car. Going back to number 8 here, we have, this is from 1991, so this would be Rick Wilson driving the car. Rick drove the car for 1 year, but Bobby Hillin drove it the year before. And just Snickers being on a car at that time was really unique. There weren't many candy companies involved in NASCAR at that time. So this was always kind of a paint job that always stuck out. I didn't have any of the DEI Budweiser liveried paint jobs that Dale Earnhardt Jr. drove. Of course, many people are going to get on here and say, hey, I didn't see this number, I didn't see that number, I didn't see my favorite driver. Well, again, this is what I like and what I think is important to me and what stands out to me. So this one was significant because this was the first number 8 car after Dale Earnhardt Jr. left DEI. It was driven by Mark Martin and Eric Almirola. They split time in the U.S. Army Chevrolet that you can see here. Painted up very similar to the Budweiser colors, except being red and black. This one's black and yellow. We have a number 9 car here of Casey Kane. The original Dodge dealers cards that came in 2001 were really bland, didn't have a lot of flash to them. But this one I really enjoyed the way that they tried to make something of it, and it really stuck out on the track, and I really liked how it was clean, very tight, very sharp looking car. So I really appreciated that car. Excuse me. I always thought this car was really bright and eye-catching at the track. The picture doesn't show it, but this is Derek Cope. The picture doesn't show how bright this car truly was. It almost looked like it was pink when you seen it in person. We go to a very iconic number 11. A Junior Johnson-owned Buick's Mountain Dew sponsored. Darrell Waltrip drove these cars in 1981 and 82 to back-to-back series championships. In 1983, they switched from Buick to Chevy. Of course, this is the, looks like a Caprice. But they also ran the Monte Carlo as well, and they switched from Buicks to Chevys in '83, switched from Mountain Dew to Pepsi, but Darrell was runner-up in the 1984 point standings. 1985, same team, switched to Budweiser. This is 1984. Their 85 car, slightly different paint job, and we're stuck on the stack here. But as you can see, 1985, they had just a slightly different paint job. They ran this paint job also in 1986, but it did have the notchback SS window. So I did think those two cars were very clean. 1993, Jimmy Spencer ran this number 12 car. I always liked the door numbers there, where the colors were inverted as to the paint scheme. Instead of picking just a solid color like a white or an orange or something to make them maybe stand out, they went with this unique paint job, and I always appreciated that. Bobby Allison's team also in 1995 had this unique paint scheme sponsor from Straight Arrow Mane and Tail. It is a horse shampoo that is safe for human use as well, but I always like those fading paint jobs where they would go from one color to another, not necessarily a solid break in color, but a little bit of a fade. I always like that one. 1998, Jerry Nadeau ran this car for part of the year before he was released, and Ted Musgrave and a couple other drivers took over. This is the team that was co-owned by Bill Elliott and Dan Marino. That's why it's done up in the colors that it is and the number 13. 1993 was the last full-time season Billy Hagan was a car owner. This was the car Terry Labonte drove to that season, and it was the first season Terry Labonte had that he did not score a top 5 finish. I always liked this paint job that Tony Stewart had early in his ownership career when he switched from Gibbs' team to his own team with car owner Gene Haas. A very crisp, very clean paint job, and of course Tony won the championship in 2011. Yeah, 2011 with this car. This is the original, one of the original DEI entries, number 14. This would have been driven by Steve Park in 1997, late in the season, to get him some seat time in a Cup Series team before that team moved up and became the number 1 team in 1998. Dick Trickle drove this car in 1995 for Bud Moore. Always enjoyed this paint job. Lake Speed drove the same car in 1994 with this exact same paint job. We have Dale Earnhardt. He drove this car in 1982 and 83. In 83, they had the round nose, more sleekly designed Thunderbirds. Yes, Dale drove a Ford for 2 years, and I always enjoyed this paint scheme. Ricky Rudd did drive this car in 1984 with the identical paint scheme on it. So it's always a pretty fast car, just had some reliability issues, but I always enjoyed this paint scheme. This was a fun one in the mid-90s. Wally Dallenbach Jr., Hayes Modems. This was also a Bud Moore-owned team. This was Bud's last full-time season before sponsorship dried out. Always just thought those colors looked really good. The graphics worked really well. And it was a time when the internet was still, in a home-to-home thing, was still in its infancy, and the modem industry was just starting to pick up a little bit. Don't know if Hayes Modem still exists or not, but I always enjoyed this car on the track. Wally Dallenbach also drove for Jack Roush in 1992 and 1993 with Keystone Beer sponsorship. This was a Jack Roush-owned car. Always liked those numbers. I like the fadeaway numbers. I like the brightness of that yellow ribbon going around the bottom of the car. Very, very nice looking car. Got a Darrell Waltrip Tide Ride. This one would have been from 1988, 87, 88, 89 era. DW also drove his own team for many years. In 1997 at Daytona, he had a chrome car, very shiny, very sleek. The original Parts America scheme was pretty nice, but I really wanted to set this one, just set it apart from the rest of them. So I wanted to show that one. And then his last start as a car owner in 1998 at Darlington was a tribute to Tim Flock. 1998, Darrell had sponsorship woes. They quit paying him, so he pulled their decals. He wanted to run number 300 because that's what the Flock brothers ran back in the 60s and 50s. But NASCAR said no, so he just put the 17 back on the car and painted it up just like the cars that the Flock brothers ran back in the day. Excuse me. This is the original car that Joe Gibbs Racing would have started back in 1992 with Dale Jarrett driving. They still do have Interstate Batteries occasionally sponsoring the team. You can see the NFL logos there on the hood since Joe still was a coach at the time. Do have a Home Depot car of Tony Stewart here. We're halfway through what I think my camera will record, so I'm going to step on it just a little bit more. So we have the Joe Gibbs owned Home Depot Pontiacs that Tony Stewart won his first couple of championships in and was 1999 Rookie of the Year. We have a Bill Davis owned MB&A Pontiac. Normally this car was black with gray trim, but this was a reverse paint scheme they ran for a while. This number 22 was a Bill Davis owned Ford. Bobby Labonte was the driver. And a lot of people will think Junior Johnson owned this 22 car because he did run an identically painted car in 91 and 92. But that car was renumbered as 27 and got the McDonald's sponsorship. But that was the Bill Davis car. This card I picked out for the 22 car, but it also does have the 28 car of Davey Allison. So that's Bobby and Davey Allison. Very nice looking cars on both of those. Davey didn't have the Haviland sponsorship yet because Texaco was in a bankruptcy proceeding. About 4 races into the season, in Atlanta, Texaco finally was allowed to be put on their cars. We have the Smokin' Joe's car of Jimmy Spencer here. That car created, of course, some controversy with Joe Camel. When that controversy kind of started uprising, they went to the Winston, which was their parent brand. R.J. Reynolds Tobacco's big brand was Winston, of course, sponsored the Winston Cup Series. Talked about Jeff Gordon a little bit ago. There's his famous rainbow-colored DuPont Chevrolets. He ran that paint scheme from late 92 to 2001. In the late 90s, Jeff Gordon and Ray Evernham teamed up in the Busch Series with Gordon Evernham Motorsports and created this guy, this Pepsi Chevrolet. They ran about 10 races together before the team kind of was either disbanded or was absorbed into the Hendrick Empire. I don't really recall. Another iconic paint scheme of the day was this 26 car, the Quaker State car, owned by drag racer Kenny Bernstein. This car ran from 1986 to 86 to 95. And near the end, Kenny tried to sell the team. It didn't sell, so he just folded the team. Then you have 1989. Could be from 88, but it's also 89, Rusty Wallace. He was the Winston Cup champion that year in this car. Very clean-looking Kodiak Pontiac there. 1990 was Rusty's first year driving for the Miller Genuine Draft People with Raymond Beadle's team. Raymond Beadle's team would fold at the end of 1990, and Rusty and this Miller Genuine Draft sponsor would go on to the number 2 Penske car. Another fun number 27 car was this Castrol Chevy driven by Casey Atwood in the Busch Series in 1999 and 2000. Casey had a crazy accident at Daytona in the Busch race. That's all over YouTube. We talked about the 28 car a little bit ago. You've seen the white and yellow, the white and the black and the red number 28. Davey ran that paint scheme in 87, 88, 89. 1990, he had a gold numbered card that wasn't too attractive, but from 1991 to 93 when he passed, he ran this car, and you see the digits on it, how the font is on the 28. After he passed in 94, they switched to this font with Ernie Irvin and later Dale Jarrett. And then Ricky Rudd ran a similar font a little bit later on, but the 28 Texaco Haviland car was always a very iconic car. You have Cale Yarborough's 1988 Oldsmobile here. This was the final year that Cale ran in the Cup Series. Again, I like those fadeaway numbers. The paint was very clean. Didn't have a lot of success this year, but it was his final year, and I always enjoyed the Hardy sponsorship, the way that Cale's cars always looked. This was a unique car. Steve Grissom, number 29. He was 1994 rookie contender. Car owned by Gary Bechtel. This was the Diamond Ridge Chevrolet. Not sure what Diamond Ridge is, but I think it had something to do with the mining group that Gary Bechtel and his family was involved in. You have a number 31 car here, Ward Burton. This was owned by A.G. Dillard, who moved up with Ward from the Busch Series. Always thought that was a unique Hardee's paint job. Jeff Burton in the AT&T car. Of course, when Jeff took this car over, it was sponsored by Singular Wireless. Singular was bought out by AT&T and rebranded, but the Sprint Cup Series was the sanctioning body sponsor at the time, so they gave them a basically a sunset provision. We'll let you come in and keep sponsoring the car, but you basically can only do it for a couple more years, and that's what happened as AT&T was phased out. As was Alltel that became Verizon. Then you had Dale Jarrett. This is a popular paint scheme in the Busch series in the early 90s. Of course, Corey LaJoie ran that as his throwback at Darlington last year. One of my favorite drivers of all time, Harry Gant, the Skull Bandit. This would have been from 1984. And from the time Harry retired in 1994, there were just minor alterations to this paint scheme from year to year, depending on the associate sponsors and the team that he would drove for. This was the car that Alan Kwiecki drove to 1986 Rookie of the Year, number 35. It just got chopped off there by the card. Quincy's Steakhouse. Alan ran the whole season on 2 cars and 1 engine. Then the winning Rookie of the Year and getting Xerox sponsorship the next year allowed him to expand his operation a little bit, and of course he won the 92 title. Tabasco Fiasco from 1998. This is one of the many paint jobs the Tabasco car ran in 1998. I think you can look that one up online. That's a whole video in itself. 36, this would have been Derek Cope in 1997. Ernie Irvan took this car over in 1998, 1999. They switched to M&M sponsorship, and they've been in the game ever since, going to a few different teams now with Kyle Busch. Coors Light always had some really sharp paint schemes. This one's one Sterling Marlin drove in 1996. Then Robbie Gordon would take this car over in 1997. Very, very nice paint Jeep. I'm sorry, Sterling would have been after Robbie Gordon. I had my years confused because got the 96 paint scheme coming up here in a minute. So I apologize for that. This would have been in 1998 or 99 when Sterling was driving this cars. And always liked Felix Sabates had those kind of subscript numbers there. The 4 and the 0 are a little bit offset. This was always a unique paint scheme to me. Always liked it. Larry Hedrick, number 41, Mannheim Auctions. Phil Parsons was the driver in 1993. You just kind of have colors going every which way in this one, but it was a very unique paint job. We have an iconic number 42 of Kyle Petty driving for Sabco in the early 90s. This was always a very nice paint job that everybody seemed to enjoy. Here's that 96 paint job for Coors Light that I was talking about. Although the car is 95, Kyle did run this sponsorship in 96. Here's another subscript number, Joe Nemechek with Sabco and his Bell South car, very colorful car. They'd have a couple renditions of this car, one with a blue front, and then Kenny Irwin took it over and all the blue became green. Sadly, Kenny passed away in 2000 after a practice crash in New Hampshire. 1981-82 era, they ran these Buicks and Petty Enterprises, and you can just see the reverse paint schemes. Richard in the 43, Kyle in the 42. 1986, Pontiac debuted the Pontiac 2+2. It was a big, clunky model that a lot of the guys said didn't handle good. But as you can see, Petty's paint schemes didn't change much over the years. 1996, Bobby Hamilton drove for Petty Enterprises, and this was their 25th anniversary paint scheme they ran in a number of races. Thought this one was a really sharp-looking paint job. Jeff Purvis driving for James Finch in this Jackaroo-sponsored car. I always liked this car. It was just kind of a crazy paint job going everywhere. Kyle Petty with the Hot Wheels. He ran in 97, 98 through about 2000. Here's a special paint scheme with the Blues Brothers 2000 movie on the Hot Wheels car. I think that one was a very popular collector's item with the fans, the diecast was. Probably the cleanest UPS paint job that I like. Most of the other ones were solid brown, but they really did work with Dale Jarrett's car here when he drove for Michael Waltrip Racing. Of course, the late Adam Petty, his Busch Series car here, the Spree prepaid phone cards. And of course, Bubba Wallace ran this paint scheme last year at Darlington as a throwback. We have Wally Dallenbach Jr. here, another Sabco car with those subset numbers, or whatever you want to call it, subscript. First Union Bank, always liked that paint job. Busch Series car, Ken Schrader, his own Busch Series car in the AC Delco before it moved over to Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. Another Mannheim car, but this is not a Larry Hedrick car. This is Richard Jackson's car, Leo Jackson car, the Jackson brothers. Robert was running a few Cup races in this car in 94 before he became a full-time Cup driver in 95. Ray and Diane DeWitt ran this car in 1994 for Jimmy Hensley. Again, it's got those fadeaway numbers on that paint that I like, and it was just kind of a unique paint job as well. Sadly, Petron Plus did not keep up their payment. 2000, Joe Bessie started a Cup team with Pico Energy Power Team out of Philadelphia area. Driver was Jeffrey Bodine. This is probably one of the most iconic Busch Series cars in history that Mark Martin drove to several wins in the early to mid-90s before he finally semi-retired out of that series. 1993, Dave Marcus gets a sponsor whenever he can. While he was here testing in Indianapolis at the tire test, he picked up a local car dealer, Dan Young Chevrolet, on the hood of his car and on the sides as well. This was the original Base Motorsports entry. This would have been Jack Sprague, but this team would eventually win the 94 championship with Johnny Benson. Let me think that through. The 95 championship with Johnny Benson, and 96 and 97 with Randy LaJoie. With Benson, they won with Lipton Tea as their sponsorship, but with LaJoie, this was the sponsorship that they had, and this is a unique, not really super unique, but I always liked this paint job. Factory Stores of America sponsored Butch Mock Motorsports in 94-95. Factory Stores was basically an early outdoor mall. I believe they still exist, I'm not sure, but I always thought this was a unique paint scheme. And usually on the TV panel on the back of the car, they would have different stores that were in their malls represented. Furniture Row Racing. This would have been when Regan Smith was driving, but this paint job pretty much went unchanged throughout their later run. Always just like that flat black. A couple Red Bull paint schemes here. This one's Scott Speed. They ran silver near the end of his run. And then this was kind of their original colors with Brian Vickers. I did like that paint job. Another Speed, no relation to Scott, but Lake Speed had his own team with this Wins Kmart Oldsmobile back in 1988. Of course, this is at Darlington where Lake got his first career win. We have a number 88 Quality Care Ford red carpet lease car of Dale Jarrett. Really like this car. It was very clean. Of course, Dale won the 1999 Cup Series championship in that car. 88 is represented with a couple others. This is Rusty Wallace when he won Rookie of the Year in 1984 driving for Cliff Stewart. Buddy Baker, near the end of his driving career, drove his own number 88 Red Baron Pizza sponsored Oldsmobile. They don't show up real good, but those numbers are a nice reflective gold color. We have Dick Trickle here in 1998-99 with Junie Donlevy's Heilig Meyer sponsored Fords. Very nice paint job. I like that teal trim across the bottom. Very iconic Sunoco branded car here with Terry Labonte, which was probably hard to pull that through because Union 76 was the fuel at the time. So you see Ultra Sunoco products there. So as long as they had the word products, they could be a sponsor because they didn't want a competing fuel company. And of course, John Deere, Chad Little, this team started life in the Busch Series as number 23 and moved up to Cup Series in 1997. Would later become part of Roush Racing, and Kurt Busch would eventually take this over to the 2004 Cup Series title. A couple more here. 1993, Derek Cope ran Cale Yarbrough's Bojangles sponsored Ford in this series, in the Cup Series. Always like that paint job, very unique. But in the first 3 races, they ran 3 different paint jobs in 2 different numbers. That's another story for another day. 1994, Derek Cope came back, was released mid-year. Jeremy Mayfield took this car over. Fingerhut sponsorship. Always like that paint job, very unique. That kind of that deep lavender, light purple color worked really well with this sponsor. And our last one of the day, Jeff Burton. Love this Exide with the lightning bolts that he had back in the early 2000s there. This sponsorship would eventually go away at the end of the 2000 season. Citgo would come on board, but this was a pretty sharp car. Yes, there's a lot more cars out there that I wanted to include in this video. There's probably some that I should have included, but I either didn't have cards of them or I could not find them. So I apologize if your favorite driver or your favorite paint scheme wasn't represented. But I enjoyed this video, so I hope you guys enjoy it too. Like I said, it's going to be one of my longer videos here. So I'm getting ready to sign off because I know I'm going to run out of time here on my phone. If I don't, I'm at 29 minutes and counting. We're at 83 subs. When we get to 100, we're going to give away a Tony Stewart, a Ken Griffey Jr., or a Braun Strowman rookie card, choice of by the winner when we get to that point. I thank all you guys for watching the videos. Let's keep those subs coming, keep those likes coming, keep those comments coming. I thank you all again, and have a great day.